Hello and welcome back to the InterDrone podcast, your 30,000-foot view of the commercial drone industry. My name is CJ Smith. It is Tuesday, October 27th. Joined today with Leslie Wolf, conference producer for InterDrone, and our special guest, Scott Mlakar. He's a captain at the Willoughby Fire Department. Scott is a 33-year fire service veteran and 32-year member of the fire department in Willoughby, Ohio. He's currently in charge of developing and implementing Lake County's public safety unmanned aerial systems program, which serves fire, police, and all county special teams, including hazmat, technical rescue, FIU, search and rescue, bomb squad, SWAT, and narcotics. He is a licensed FAA 107 remote pilot. And he is a featured InterDrone speaker who will be joining us at InterDrone Online later in December of this year. So, Scott, thanks so much for joining us on this Tuesday morning. I gave a kind of a brief introduction about some of the work you do, and obviously you touch on a lot of different areas within the realm of public safety and UAS use. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your position at the fire department, your position at the Lake County's public safety program, and I guess how you've been really building out that public safety program up there in Ohio?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me this morning or whatever time it is when you're actually listening to this, right? So the backstory here is about probably 6 years ago. I was always involved with and in charge of special teams, and one of the areas of my responsibility was hazardous materials response. Right around that time, because by nature I was a hobbyist, I always liked the RC and whatnot. I had seen the first DJI little Phantom drone, and I thought, boy, that would be an excellent tool for hazmat response. I could take that little drone up, send it downrange, look, see what was going on. It would save us time. It would protect our people. And I thought at the time it'd be as simple as just buying it, throwing it on a truck, and that would be that. And it was going to be in addition to our hazmat team at that period of time. And this is kind of when all the U.S. units started kind of spooling up, right, where they started seeing this is, as the guys used to tease me, well, you're playing with your toy. And I'd say, well, it's not a toy, it's a tool, right? So when we started looking into how to do that, what we ran into was, unlike a lot of things, the aviation industry is an industry born in captivity. Industries born in the wild are great, right? They start up the internet. When it started up, it was the wild, wild west. You could do whatever you wanted. There's no regulations. It was all brand new. They didn't know what they could or couldn't do, which was awesome. Drones, not so much. Drones fall under the regulatory umbrella. That was born in captivity. There was existing aviation rules having to do with the national airspace. So I thought, boy, we just throw our drone up in the air and fly it downrange. It'll be awesome. At the time, I found out that if I just flew as a hobbyist, which I was not, I could do whatever I wanted to do. But in order to do it for the fire department, I would have to get, at that time, you had to have a COA. So that brought things to a screeching halt, but kind of started our whole program. So we went forward in that mission and obviously purchased our first aircraft and started putting policies in place. And as we kind of talked about prior to the podcast, what I really needed was a book or some guidance on how to build a program, because at first I thought it was just going to be this little thing on the truck. And what I realized was, no, there's a lot more to this. There's a lot more uses to this. So we went forward, started doing testing. Around that time, FA 107 came out, which ended up being a very, very good pathway for a lot of teams to start off. Our particular team here in Lake County, I was on the fire side, so we recognized that law enforcement clearly could hugely benefit from this, and decided at that point, in order to pilots to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that we would invite law enforcement in to work with us, which basically means we're a multidisciplinary team. We have police, fire, EMA, we have health department people that all participate with us. That is huge from the standpoint of, number one, funding a program, because now you're pulling from multiple sources. Two, having enough qualified pilots, because as I always like to say, out of North Carolina, in the public safety, we're accidental pilots. We have a primary work function, and that's fire and rescue or police or EMS. But we take on these extra things: hazmat, technical rescue, and now unmanned aircraft. So you needed a small core of people that were really dedicated and wanted to do that. So we brought law enforcement in. We did presentations to those agencies and most importantly, city councils and governments, because, and we can talk about when you build a program here a little bit later, to get buy-in, and which we did. So fast forward to about a little over half of my pilots are police officers. The other half are fire or EMA or whatever the other components of it. And the program grew out with funding on both sides, from police and fire, to where it's at today, which is 25 pilots that provide 24/7 coverage, as you said in the opening, to all the special teams. So it gets used for the bomb squad, narcotics, hazmat team, police and fire responses, whatever it happens to be. Very well received, and honestly used more than anyone I think ever anticipated that it would be used. There's a lot of other specialties, as I mentioned, bomb squad, SWAT teams and whatnot, but this has really become an ancillary part of supporting all of those operations. So right now, like I said, 25 pilots. We have aircraft staged in different parts of our county with different pilots. A call for assistance goes out. We use an app-based callback type system. The call goes out, it hits one of the pilots indicate whether they're coming, they respond to the scene with their aircraft, and then we have a larger response vehicle, which is essentially the hazmat truck, because we kind of repurposed or dual purposed that vehicle, and they go and respond. And then we provide whatever support we can, and as the technology grows, the capability of what we're able to do has also grown exponentially, and we expect that to continue moving forward.
Well, great. I think that's such an interesting model, and it's a smart way to do it, that you're able to kind of draw funding from both those different departments, and obviously pool resources. And when you think of something like hazmat or bomb squad, they likely aren't being tapped as often as something like your general first responders, fire, police. So I think being able to share those resources cross department is just a really smart way to do it. So.
You get buy-in. You get buy-in when you do that. All of those different agencies, when you have buy-in, you become part of them. Whether it's a SWAT team or bomb squad or hazmat, the more uses I can show for that platform, even if we use it for public works, we have erosion problems. We have wonderful Lake Erie here, and I get a request to go down and do mapping for an erosion study on the shoreline. Well, that would be city council, that'd be government, right? But they see that data. So the more uses I have for something like that, the easier it is when I come in and ask for additional monies. They go, well, no, we're definitely getting our money's worth out of this. So it works out well.
Really proving that value. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that's our humble beginnings.
Yeah, and I know you guys have come a long way, and we're going to ask Scott some more questions specific to the drone program in Ohio a little bit later in the podcast. If anyone's tuning in for the first time, we talk about a couple articles from the past week, do a kind of a brief news roundup, and then we do a little bit of a deep dive with our guest. So the first article I want to talk about, so firefighters are using drones to help fight fires across the state of California. Crews are continuing to battle 26 major wildfires in California, with over 18,000 firefighters on the front lines. A spokesperson from the deployment said that California firefighters are increasingly deploying drones to provide important situational awareness, enabling them to better spot fire trends and determine the best way and safest way to deploy resources. Spokesperson explained that drones can be deployed quickly to fly overhead and provide real-time visual and heat imagery to command centers using special sensors. Scott, I'd love to just get kind of some of your thoughts on this deployment. Can you compare and contrast maybe using drones to fight a fire in an urban environment versus something like what we're seeing out here in California?
Well, it's twofold. So what are the 3Ds of drones? What do they do well, right? The dull, the dirty, and the dangerous. So in this particular case, that when they're used for wildfires, the primary thing that you would consider a drone just with a normal camera on it would be for overwatch. So now I have the ability as an instant commander to put an aircraft in the air and see a large scale picture of the incident in real time to make decisions. I can see deployments and where people are at. I can see what's going on, and that's just with an optical camera. So in California's case, and there was some really, really good studies done last year during the campfires, last year or 2 years ago. I might be off a year. But when the campfires burned out, large areas. I believe it was last year during the wildfires, and the same thing this year. Not only did they go in and use them for managing the emergency, because now, because of the technology with thermal cameras, I can see through smoke. So a normal helicopter, unless it's flying with a FLIR camera, just if I'm using an optical camera, I can't see where there's hot spots. I can't direct things. I can't see patterns. But with thermal technology, I can see all of that. So on the front half of that, for wildfires, on a wildfire site, first off, on the front half, as far as forestry and forestry management, I can go in and do mapping of a large scale area and see areas where maybe I want to do some prepping to prevent the wildfires, how much debris is on the ground, where it needs to be cleared out, all part of forestry management. Okay, so that's my pre-planning side of it. During an emergency, clearly I can put aircraft in the air. It's interesting in California because, as you know, they have air assets with the air tankers and helicopters, so they have a whole ton of hardware. But for a small crew on the ground, they have a small drone that they can pull out of their backpack and put up, coordinating obviously with the manned aircraft, and be able to see what's around them, the level of safety, which is really what this comes down to: protecting our guys, protecting police officers, firefighters, and the public.
Right.
The level of situational awareness that they have from being able to deploy that drone is invaluable, because they have something they never had before. And being able to push that data out, whether it's through a streaming platform and share with remote stakeholders who are part of the overall incident management portion of it, is also invaluable. In a wildfire, in an urban environment versus, they call it the urban wildland interface. So, and in California is a perfect example, right? We build these houses all the way up in areas that probably aren't the greatest areas to be building homes in, because they are in that urban wildland interface. In an urban environment, obviously the same value, but in a wildfire environment where you have zero visibility, you have rapid moving fires, you need to move people and assets around as you need to. They really speak for themselves, and they're being integrated. The last part of that would be, like as with the campfires, if people don't think about this technology evolves, is the mapping. On the mapping side of things, after the campfires, they went up and with a team of pilots from all over and did mapping of that whole entire area. So now they have highly detailed, relevant maps now with GIS overlays that shows them, because there's now nothing remaining. It's no different than when we have a tornado here in our area, and if it wipes out a whole neighborhood, there's no street signs. You can't tell what's what. You don't know whose home is whose. You don't know where to start. I can do an overlay of existing GIS data, and after the in this case wildfire or whatever significant event, flooding as it were, and it allows me to quickly identify the losses that are there, who's part of that, who should have been there, who may or may not be missing. The after action analysis with the ability to do mapping over large areas is also invaluable, and that's another thing that UAS bring to that type of event.
All right. Talk to us about the 3Ds. What was that? It was the dull, the dirty, and the I hadn't heard that before, but we might need to reuse that.
And you think about it, it's a perfect fit, right? The dull stuff, when I stick a drone down into space and I want to do an inspection, and we know that there's drones that are encaged and I can put them into confined spaces and whatnot, right? The dull, just hanging around, overwatch, watching systems and processes, and then dangerous, which is kind of, where public safety comes in. Anytime I can have situational awareness, that's really the key word there, of what's going on in real time, and see things that not everybody can, or at least validate the reports I'm hearing on the radio with a visual image. That makes me as an incident commander a heck of a lot more effective.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just exciting to see this technology being used. I mean, California seems like they've been going through problems with, mass fires, just constant for the last 3+ years. So it's just every time I can't keep track. Like you mentioned, you forgot what year it was with that one fire, and I'm the same way. So it's just great to see this technology being used and hopefully helping and stopping the spread.
You got fires, floods, earthquakes. So they're kind of a whole little ecosystem of themselves. where, how things come into play. But again, and knowing some of the guys that are out there in LA, and up there in Menlo Park is the other area, where they have nice established units. They've done a lot of work in that area and sharing that information out. Like, how's a guy from Ohio know what they did in California? As we talked about earlier, that networking, using social media, using groups to get information so that as you build your program, you can learn from the experience of others.
Right. Right. You mentioned there's no playbook, really. We're all kind of building this out and writing the playbook together and trying to help each other and share ideas.
We tell that to every one of our pilots, that they are writing the book for how future unmanned aircraft units will conduct their business, because you'll figure out what works and sometimes what doesn't work. It's all part of the process.
Yeah. And on a similar note, that's a great segue into our second article, public safety drones, the move towards standardized training. So an agreement between ASTM International and drone responders will move towards standardized global training of public safety personnel. The new program, Public Safety UAS STI, will provide public safety UAS training providers with a third-party evaluation of their curriculum for conformance to applicable ASTM standards, says the press release. Programs that meet or exceed UAS STI will receive a certificate and digital emblem from drone responders and ASTM, confirming they have been approved as a public safety UAS STI approved training provider. Scott or Leslie, whoever wants to jump in. I mean, what do you guys think? Talk about standardized or standards across the industry. We've been seeing a lot of traction, I think, in that realm, and especially for public safety, which need either government buy-in or public acceptance. I think a move towards just recognizing that this program is doing the right thing and doing what it say it's doing, it is really powerful. And so how do you guys think this may affect the kind of the growth of public safety drone programs across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think standardization is always a really positive thing. We've been talking a little bit about how information is gathered right now from multiple sources, and oftentimes, as Scott was saying, there's not a book that kind of dictates how you're going to build out the program. So this is obviously a huge and exciting push, and will kind of shape what public agencies look like as they're building out in the future. But Scott, I'm also curious to hear too, because you've been in this for so long, how kind of you've seen these training practices and standards shift over time, and kind of when you were building your program out too. You mentioned social media and things like that. Was that kind of where you were turning to for that information as you were building things out?
Honestly, and it's funny, because the one thing that struck me, Leslie, was you've been at this for so long, and I think about it now. I said our program started about 6 years ago, and in the grand
so long in this industry is
6 years is a long time, but because it's moved so fast, 6 years is a big chunk of that as far as sharing information and standards, right? So interestingly, and we kind of talked about this when we were leading up to this, is because there's no guideline or book or manual when all this started, and because the unmanned aircraft, it's kind of twofold. Unmanned aircraft in general were born into an industry in captivity, meaning that the existing manned aircraft that were there and unmanned aircraft all fell under FAA regulatory control. And that's great for some things, but the standards part of that whole thing is, because UAS, public safety UAS, and UAS in general are new to a bunch of different verticals, but certainly to public safety, is there isn't anything there. There's no standards. And drone responders, and encourage anybody that that is in public safety to become part of that. It's free, so it's one of that's one of those great words that in public safety we like, because our budgets are limited. You can share a network with information with them. And you see this with not only with I think it's ASTM, right, standards, and then the other part of that is on the fire side, but it applies to all public safety is NFPA 2400. So you have two really standards, and the ASTM people worked and sat on the committees for the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association standard as well. So they're very, very similar with each other. And in addition to that, the work that NIST has done along with that. So if you look at those standards, a lot of what NIST has done, and NIST has done some tremendous studies, certainly across a lot of different industries. On the fire side, they've done a bunch, and they've moved into unmanned aircraft with the whole NIST training thing to establish baselines and guidelines. So one of the things that was direly needed is basic standards, because right now, other than me training all of my pilots under 107, and you should do that whether you're flying under a COA or whether your program's under 107. And there's distinct advantages that we won't get into now, but that's probably a podcast for another time, because you're going to have a whole debate of which one's better, or do you need both, or whatever. But where's the benchmark? Where's the benchmark where I know that how I'm training and how I'm flying and how I'm operating is now conforming to a norm? And we're finally getting where we talked about, where I would love to write a book, Public Safety US for Dummies, right? So that I could grab that manual, I could grab that book and find out what are the best practices. Well, we're establishing them now. So when you see an organization like ASTM and NFPA working together to establish those standards, they're doing exactly that. They're saying, hey, if you're gonna follow the book, if you're gonna start to learn things, here's the cumulative knowledge we've had from this long industry, 6 years. Here's all the stuff we've learned in the last 6 years for how to operate in a public safety forum. That needs to go further. It needs to go into maintenance of aircraft. A normal manned pilot, if they're flying just a Cessna around, as everybody knows, after so many hours you got to do this, and after so many hours you got to do that, because they're aircraft. Well, here's a newsflash: unmanned aircraft are aircraft. A $30,000 drone flying over your head, if it lands on you or it hits the ground, is a pretty pricey price to pay. So there's work to do in all those areas, and organizations like Drone Responders and these well-known national organizations and certification organizations like ASTM and FPA, NIST, and the others are all part of building that out. So that is really needed as far as developing training programs that meet a standard and norm, and operating your program in compliance with FAA guidelines, and also best practices that have been established by teams all over the country and world, really doing that. Right. So yeah, that's a good thing to see. The partnership between the two is great, and being able to say you're certified. If I have an accident, and now I get questioned by the FAA of how I train my people. And we do the same thing on the fire side, to be able to tell them, listen, our training program is in compliance with NFPA or ASTM standard, blah. That gives me a benchmark to start on. It's not law. And I don't get a certificate. They don't give. We always say, well, am I going to get a certificate of? Excuse me. Am I going to be certified to be a public safety pilot? It's like, you're going to comply with these things and have a certificate of completion stating that the program that you've taken is in compliance with this nationally recognized standard. And from the FAA standpoint, if you ever have an accident and they come in and they're doing an audit of how you train your pilots and how you operate, if you comply with those national standards, it's going to bode very well for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think back to industry experience, I think it's all about context, right? If someone has 2 years of experience and someone has 6 years of experience, well, you only have 4 more years of experience in a traditional industry. Maybe that's pretty nominal, but you have 3 times as much experience. So when you put it that way, it's a lot of information and a lot of experience.
It's not like 30 years of experience. It's like the people that have experience, usually some people will stretch it, but in public safety unmanned aircraft, 5 or 6 years is pretty much when everything started. There's a few people that are crazy hobbyists that were doing it much earlier than that, and whatnot. But aviation in general, a lot of what we do with unmanned aircraft, all is born out of the aviation industry. So there is a way to go there. I've learned a lot from guys that were manned pilots that got into unmanned aircraft and take what they've learned in manned aviation and apply it into UAS. So there's definitely lessons to be learned there as well.
Right. Well, I want to talk about this final article, and then we'll jump in and asked Scott a few deeper questions about his drone program and what he would put in his UAS drone program for public safety dummies. So I'm excited to talk about that in a second. But finally, Ohio Drone and T-Mobile partnering to bring live streaming tech to drones in the state of Ohio. So Ohio Drone is partnering with T-Mobile to create the 5G network. The company hopes to have 100,000 accounts running within the first year of business, and once it goes live in January 2021. And the live streaming platform will first be available to government and enterprise users, with consumers gaining access by Q4 of 2021. So I mean, this is really exciting. I love seeing these states make kind of big commitments, I think, to the industry. It's got any insight into maybe what's going on behind the scenes in Ohio with regards to this network? And then specific to public safety, how do you see 5G and live streaming being used by fire, police alike?
Honestly, and what you're talking about here is Ohio Drone is actually a company in Ohio. They're in the southern part of Ohio in Cincinnati. And so they partnered up with, in this particular case, a company called DroneStream, and are using Sprint and T-Mobile's network as a base for this, which is fine. And 5G kind of factors into that. That's really good news for public safety as well, because it's an increased data speeds in the way 5G works. But at its core, what this kind of comes down to is talking about the ability to take the data that we're getting, the images, the video that we're getting, and stream that out to remote stakeholders. And at its core, when you're building a UAS program, it's great to be able to put the aircraft up in the air. And when you fly on these missions, I'll have my controller, I got the aircraft in the air, and I usually have 3 people standing behind me that want to look at my screen, which, because I have the little iPad, Android tablet, whatever I happen to be using. So the subsequent thing is they go, well, how can I share this with other people? Now, locally, I can plug that controller into a large screen on scene, and we do that. So on a SWAT mission, if I'm flying, the pilot has what they call manned aviation term here, sterile cockpit, meaning that he is not being bothered by a bunch of people over his shoulders and radios cackling and whatnot. He can focus on his task at hand. And I take that locally, and I run a cable over to a big 36-inch TV in the back of a vehicle, and all of the incident commanders, all the stakeholders locally in an operation can see what's going on, and that's invaluable. But now, how do I take that and push that out? This is where 5G and these networks come in, and there's a lot of people jumping in this space and these platforms as far as, okay, great, you have all of this information. How do I share it? And the way that happens is through streaming, and there's different ways to do that. Some of it is software-based, some of it's hardware-based. Both of them work well. They're all extremely reliant upon solid 4G, or as we move and build it out, 5G connections. You're moving video is a lot of data, and you can compress it and whatnot, but you have to have, for that to work, you have to have solid connection speeds all over. And that's essentially what you see happening is these larger companies partnering up. Kitty Hawk has offerings. I'm most familiar with DroneSense, and that's a tremendous platform. But there are others, and so we look at all of those, and depending upon your organization, what you tend to do, they all come down to the same basic thing. If I set up and I have a large scale fire, whether it's a wildfire, it's an earthquake, it's flooding, whatever event it is, I want to share that back with a command post miles away, and we do that by utilizing the 4G networks. And it works out extremely well. We can put multiple aircraft in the air and have all of those live feeds there. And then as they build this out, because of the data, now initially we could used to be able to do it actually through YouTube and Facebook, but now they built it out where these are dedicated secured networks. They have to be secured for public safety, clearly, right? Now I push that information out there, and that's great. I have a video feed. Now a lot of these platforms are adding interactivity. So if I'm showing them a picture and I'm flying my aircraft and I have lost missing hikers, I need to communicate with them and show them so they can send the ground units out where those hikers are at. Now, I might be able to give them GPS coordinates. I should be able to give them GPS coordinates, but not everybody on the ground necessarily has GPS coordinates. So what they're allowing us to do is take our image on top of a map and be able to drop pins on that. So I can turn around from the air, identify a hot spot at a fire or a lost or missing person or someone that's running from the police and needs to be located, and I can drop a pin and locate it. And by doing so, at the command center, they can get on the radio and tell the ground units, hey, you need to direct your efforts wherever that happens to be at, and communicate back and forth between the pilot. So that connectivity, the 4G and 5G connectivity and the streaming platforms, not only are streaming data, but they're also streaming information back and forth. And they're feeding lat long and GPS coordinates in a geospatial information system with mapping where that pilot effortlessly, rather than trying to share it's at this coordinate, can drop a pin, and on the other end, could be 5 miles away, could be 50 miles away. At that command center, they can turn around and direct resources on the ground to wherever it is that they need to go. So it's exciting stuff. This is all this stuff, it's grown so darn fast. And every week, you see it, every week there's some new article, partnerships with people doing this. And honestly, it helps from the cost standpoint, because the more competition you have, the more innovation you have being thrown at something, the better it gets. And on our end of it, the more affordable it gets for us to be able to do it. So utilize it here. I think I mentioned earlier, over the summer, we had a variety of different missions where we really started using a lot of streaming. And that was the first exposure that a lot of the city leaders and that be on the political side. So mayors, councilmen, whoever happened to be in the control center, and more importantly, all the other agencies that maybe knew that our county had a drone program, now literally, no matter whether they're on a phone, a tablet, or a computer, could see our live feed. When we go fly in a mission now, our central dispatch center knows the feed tie-in, and they will immediately bring that up into the dispatch center. So after they put us out, if we're looking for a lost or missing boater on Lake Erie, we work with the Coast Guard for this. They have a live image as those drones are going over and doing the search of the area. So that gives us tremendous buy-in and exposure, and shows the value of your program by having that in your toolbox.
Yeah, so I wanted here to convince either regulators or governors or different government officials. And is it easier to get funding when you have more tools like this in your arsenal, and you can say, hey, like, this stuff is already out there right now. This is what we can do with it. And is it easier to make that case? For instance, you were making this case years ago when there wasn't as prominent of an industry, and there weren't as many tools in your arsenal. So I guess, can you kind of talk about what that may have been like, I guess, building your case today versus when you've been doing it?
When we first started, right, you go and you set up your presentation, and you have all of and you want to be transparent, right? Because if you're just talking about on the fire side, there's not as much concern for privacy. If you're talking on the law enforcement side, and we're a multidisciplinary team, there are concerns. How is this going to be used? Is it going to be used in a nefarious manner? So you really need to reassure the public and be transparent. Now that we've been in play for a while longer, that old adage that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, video's worth $1,000 for funding for us, because when they're able to see, they funded us on the front end, but when they get to see the finished product and they see that live feed of a child missing in the woods, or locating a lost boat on the lake, or whatever it happens to be, however we happen to be using that, as far as, to your point, as far as us gaining public support and justifying the expenditure of funds, which are tight, right? We're all competing on police and fire, and all the special teams compete for a set amount of dollars. And when you can show that, that video is worth 1,000 words. I don't have to stand in front of them and show them a short little video clip of a mission. When you see a live image coming, and I can zoom in and show something down to in great detail, or a thermal camera in the middle of the night, and it's pitch black, and there you are in the woods, and they see a target, and they can hear the radio traffic and the ground crew that's go, and they locate whoever we're looking for. It makes my job a lot easier, because I don't even have to. I just go in and say, I'd like to. Yeah, go ahead. You guys have been really busy, and whatever you need, we're going to support you for that, because it's an asset all the way across the board, and both sides, and police and fire. So 2 funding sources there for grants, for forfeiture for monies, for hazmat monies, however you happen to be funding your program. There's not a whole lot of questions asked. if you think about it, if the bomb squad could do that, how much would they, how much money would they throw at that? So, so it works out really, really well having the capability to share your streams with certainly with stakeholders that are part of the operation, and then afterwards sharing it with when you're educating people as to how it's being used and that it's being used properly.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in their public acceptance. I think that's something that the drone industry at times struggles with. What are these aircraft being used for? If the public sees a drone flying around, a lot of the times they can maybe feel threatened. Did you have any pushback from the public, or kind of in the past 6 years? And if so, what were you able to do to kind of mitigate that?
What was communication like too? Was there any sort of surprise, or how were you kind of alerting the public as to how drones are being used?
This will be in chapter 1 of the public UAS book for dummies, and that's not to say we're dummies, but you get the reference there. Mm-hmm. I anticipated when we started, because I knew that we were going to be working with law enforcement as well, that there could be some pushback. Now, all depends upon what part of the country you're from. So I knew from articles that they had started very early on the West Coast, in Seattle, in California. They all kind of headed that way, and those programs came to a grinding halt because privacy groups had concerns about how they were going to be used. They didn't get in front of it quick enough, and people were afraid that this was, does anybody have you guys ever been tagged by one of those wonderful little traffic cameras when you kind of slid through a stop sign?
All right. My buddy has. I've been in the car.
That's what people think, right? Yeah. I always found it somewhat entertaining that they felt that, aircraft have been flying around for years and no one seems to be that worried about it. Police have been using helicopters and fixed wing aircrafts. No one's worried about it. Drones come on board and all of a sudden it became this big issue. But a lot of it was just educating and establishing your playbook and your policies on the front end. So in Lake County, I made a big effort, as I said initially, to get to all the mayors and city managers and township trustees, whoever wanted to hear it, and make very, very clear what we were doing, how we were using it, what it would not be used for. On the law enforcement side, they spoke with the prosecutor to make sure that if they needed a warrant because of the operation, that they, whatever the process was, everybody's different. So you definitely want to have on the law. I'm a fire guy, but on the law enforcement side, have that conversation with the prosecutor to make sure in the rules. So we did not have any pushback, and we also engaged the media really early on. So there were multiple news stories on news channels and in print that were talking about our program, and I anticipated pushback, and I should knock on wood, but we really didn't have any in our area. But inversely, I know I have friends on the West Coast, and I know those programs got shut down, but they were smart about it. They reached out to the ACLU. They reached out to those organizations that were concerned and said, hey, here are our policies. Take a look at them. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. We're going to work with you. And they work with those organizations, the ones that you normally would be kind of the watchdog organizations, if you would. Work with those organizations to draft up and be very clear about what they intended to do, how they intended to do it, and what the rules were they were going to play by. And that for them, where they did have pushback, that for them kind of cleared the path, working with all of those other agencies to assure them that it would not be used to invade someone's privacy, that it would not be used in a nefarious manner, that it would be used to protect officers, the firefighters, and most importantly, the public.
I think you kind of highlighted something too that has become so important when it comes to public acceptance, which is just planning very carefully and really getting ahead of everything before anything starts. And I think in the early days of the pandemic, I think we saw a couple instances on the East Coast of public agencies deploying drones as sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and public backlash was pretty strong, and those programs got shut down. So I think we're seeing that careful planning and careful communication kind of leads to much better results.
Yeah, it does. And again, now it's not so new anymore. It really isn't. So I think people are getting used to it. I'm sure there are still people that just hate it to the nines. The only thing I ever saw was one blog. So it was shared with me by one of the politicians or fire chiefs around here, and somebody had their own little blog post and said how we were wasting money on this and whatnot, but it didn't really go anywhere. But for the most part, the value and the benefit for it has far outweighed anybody's concerns. And in agencies where they've had pushback, for the most part, I don't hear about that a lot. But it also hails to, when you start your program, to hit those core things, to develop very strong policy and wording and work with those groups before you start. It won't get shut down. If you do your homework on the front half and educate people on the front half, you'll be in good shape. And then as your program runs, make sure that it's up and running and that you don't have mishaps. I used to always say, listen, we have one mishap. I'm just starting out. We have a lot invested in this. One accident, one oversight is like being part of the space program. It'll set your program back 2 years trying to play catch up if you don't do something right on the front end. So being educated on the front end, networking with a lot of other people, talking to other teams, reading what's available out there is going to serve you well going forward.
Yeah, no, it's so true. You know, one mishap can set you way back, and you know, getting out in front of that and education to the public is just so important. We even saw an energy company out here in New York doing power line inspections, and Mike Leslie, my colleague, he was mentioning that they were running ads, letting the people know that this is what they were going to be doing. These, if they see drones, this is what's going on, and you know, like really making an effort and spending money to educate, because they know, I think they want to get out in front of that and do something sustainable and lasting, and education is just so important. So
see, once they start delivering a pizza and your Amazon products to your door with drones, no one will have a problem with it.
Right. 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 Yeah, right. When my gift gets here on time, then all of a sudden I'm super happy about it.
Phone case and it's here 10 minutes later, and I hear the drone drop it. All of a sudden, I won't have a problem with drones. But we're definitely getting there. And honestly, the commercial interests have pushed forth a lot of what needs to be pushed forth. That helps us on the public safety side. We don't have deep pockets. We don't have lobbyists. On the commercial side, they do. So they clear the way for beyond visual line of sight. They clear the way for all of those things that we need to do our jobs. They clear the way because for their particular use type, they need to have that type of waiver or fix. So it really does all work well together.
Right. It's great to hear you guys haven't had too much pushback either from the public. So you must be doing something right.
I think just being transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For, you know, we've talked about the UAS public safety handbook for dummies. If we were to write something like that,
I tried that, by the way. So
yeah, yeah.
Actually, I'm infringing on somebody else's trademark, I'm sure, but.
Well, yeah, we can create a subtly different name, and we'll get that book out shortly. But you mentioned first chapter education, kind of getting out in front of that public acceptance. You know, what are some of the other items you would put in a book like that if you were to write one? And you know, for anyone that works at a fire department or other public safety organization who's considering a drone program, you know, at like a really high level, you know, because we could talk about this for hours. But what are some of the things that you would want to make sure that you say to them?
On the front end, obviously, we've kind of talked about some of that. Set in place some strong policies that guide your programs. Get out in front, be transparent to get a program started. And fortunately now they kind of sell themselves, because what we see happening is one organization will start a unit over here, and then when people see the value of that, all of a sudden everybody's jumping on board. So your early adopters have done, ourselves included, have done their jobs, and you really see and start spreading out. The other half of that, I would say, walk before you run. Everybody wants to dive in, and they can go and start looking at hardware and equipment, and maybe they put some policies in place and they got their people just trained under 107. But the interesting thing about 107 and COAs is when we all learned to drive, did they just give you your driver's license after taking a written test and tell you could drive the car? No. We got to drive with the wonderful driving instructor. I don't want to date myself, but you know, the driving instructor, whatever, however they happen to be, you got to drive the car and had to show you knew how to drive the car before I got the license, right? So now we're getting all these public safety pilots, and maybe they go and they study and they take their test, and then they go out and they get equipment and hardware. And a lot of times they're not getting the right stuff they need for their mission. So selecting the right hardware and equipment is kind of step 2, right? You get the people trained, you get buy-in for the program, you set your priorities in place for the program, you go and you get equipment that fits your budget and your need, recognizing that you're a new team, and so you don't want to go out and necessarily spend $35,000 on the biggest, baddest drone that ever existed and have one of them and not learn how to fly it. And that is a big part of this too, which is where NIST comes in with their training courses. We talked about standards earlier. That's why you need standards, because what's the benchmark on that? They hand it, when you go buy a drone, it doesn't come with this wonderful little book. We keep talking about books, but even the book that comes with the drone might tell you a little bit, but it really doesn't tell you how to fly it effectively. It doesn't teach you how to utilize a thermal camera and all that you can have with thermal cameras, or the resolutions of thermal cameras. So the chapters of the book honestly would start off with starting and building a program, selecting the right hardware is 2, right? Get what you need for your mission and how to do it, and then training with that hardware in all of the areas that you're gonna do, and it branches off in a lot of things. So thermal in and of itself is a topic that you could deep dive into, and there would definitely be a chapter on there on using IR thermal imaging technology. Mapping is its own vertical. Flying with the payload is its own vertical. Flying at night, completely different experience and vertical. So having a basic training program and an advanced training program. We talked about streaming and how to push that data out. And most importantly, if you're doing searches and those types of things, understanding, working with existing stuff, right? So we have the aviation industry, we have drones, and we pull off from the aviation industry. But now I want to do a search with the drone. My goodness, if you're not reaching out to existing SAR units and canine units that do searches and working with those organizations, you're just flying around. You're not flying with purpose or function. So if whatever the hazards are that you anticipate you're going to use your unmanned aircraft program for, work with the existing body of knowledge that is there, so that you can do that. And then at some level, now you're doing searching from the air. Well, they've been doing, the Coast Guard does air searches with airplanes and helicopters, and so do the aviation units. Pull those people in. Learn from the best practices. One of the nice classes I took was a pilot out of California's helicopter pilot that flew for LA, and was taking what he learned in manned aviation and their aviation unit for searches, for suspect searches, whatever it happened to be, and was taking that, transferring that information to using it for a drone. Most public safety pilots, as I mentioned before, we're accidental pilots. It's not our primary work function. We're interested, but it's not what we do. But if we're going to do it and do it effectively, we got to get better. So those would all be, so there'd be a lot of chapters in the book, but they would build from the beginning and then really deep dive into how to do searching right, how to use thermal technology right, how to do all of these other functions. And sadly, we don't get to go play with all the cool stuff on the show floor this year at InterDrone. But normally you walk around there and you just see all sorts of really cool innovations that people have come up with. Mounting stuff, speakers on the drones, communicating back and forth, whatever it happens to be, new sensors, constantly new sensors on the drones. So training people to the hardware and using it in the most effective ways by tapping into existing knowledge that we have and applying it to unmanned aircraft.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense that in your mind, and this book too, the path to success would involve a great deal of training and also kind of getting that buy-in and relying on other groups and communication, because things are being done and we need to make sure that there's sort of those paths to communication are open and people are continuing to learn from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about the DJI ban and your thoughts on how that might affect fire departments and other public agencies.
Yeah, so right now, the DOJ has basically said, has prohibited all agencies from using funds, DOJ monies at least, for in this case, let's face it, it's targeted pretty much at DJI, and they're the #1 player. On the public safety side, we look at that and go, all right, I firmly believe that we can build effective, good aircraft here in the United States or other places. But DJI is what most agencies started with, right? I mean, let's face it, there were hobbyists that built their first drones, and DJI was built basically, it was a toy. They made it as a toy, and then they turned it into basically its entire own ecosystem. And I'm not poo-pooing the security concerns. I don't have security clearance, so I am sure that there are some things that concern them there. On our side of it, if you're not using federal funds, then it's not an issue for us at all. So if I'm not using, on the firefighter side, we assist the firefighter grant. On the law enforcement side, and I'm less familiar with that clearly because I'm not a police guy. But the DOJ grants and whatnot, if they lose access to that money, that's going to have a big impact. Now they can apply that. Doesn't mean they can't have drones. They can apply that to stuff that's made in the USA or whatever. And you see a lot of vendors pivoting, like Parrot, there's Parrot USA, Autel, it's trying to go to all components. DJ is going to kind of have a rough way to go. On our end of it, we don't rely a lot on federal funds. So we're like, okay, that's interesting, but I understand there's agencies starting out that do. There are some very good platforms coming out that will not be part of that ban. And that's good on two purposes. It's good, A, because you can use federal funds or federal grant funds to do that. But B, we're happy that there's other players in the market. Only having DJI doesn't, I mean, even Romeo Dersher will tell you, listen, it's great. I love my job and I'm excited to have it, but they want competition. We need competition that drives innovation. So the fact that you see these other manufacturers have incentive now, I guess if anything, if I see what's coming out of this that's good, is there's incentive now for other manufacturers to enter that market and innovate. The biggest issue here is cost, right? So most of the reason people went with DJI was most of the other competition was built and was $40,000 to $60,000 for just a core aircraft, and there wasn't a whole ecosystem behind it, right? There wasn't a software behind it. It was the hardware, and that was it, and whatever they internally developed on the software side. And to be honest with you, software is where it's at. We figured out the airframes; they fly good. I'd like them to fly longer. Right. I'd like a mixed thing. Software and sensors are the two things that'll drive this to all new heights. And software developers are not going to spend a lot of time and effort in a platform that's not widely distributed. So I'm not sure how it all shake out. I think at some point in time, there'll be some resolution to a point. I'm mildly entertained from the fact that as I speak to you on a webcam and I have the camera on my hip. All right.
Like I know where this is going.
Right. So this has a camera in it, a microphone in it. It knows where I'm at. It knows who I'm talking to.
And where was the phone?
Nobody's worried about this. And I'm pretty sure this is made in one of those countries that maybe we're worried about data. I have trouble wrapping my head around every citizen in the United States has a piece of technology on them that's made in a country that you're concerned about security, but we're worried about a small market sector of drones that is. So I don't know whether that answered your question or not, but
yeah. And I think to your point, competition spurring innovation. We mentioned even earlier in the podcast, competition drives prices down. And I think you in particular find yourself in an interesting position because you don't rely on DOJ funds. So you're able to carry on business as normal, but you're actually going to get more competition in the marketplace and maybe actually reap some kind of wraparound benefit from all this. So it's kind of interesting.
Exciting to see Parrot, come out. All of these, a lot of these other manufacturers now, because they see an opening. What it's basically done is opened a door, and rather than me not jumping into that arena because DJI has such a huge market share, because that's who we're talking about here, they're going, all right, we can play in this playground too. We can carve out a niche for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But it's from our standpoint, fortunately, we're not that. And I think at some level, DJI will pitch too. I remember back, I'm dating myself, but remember when autos were made in the United States and then they were made in Japan and everybody was freaking out saying, oh my gosh. And so they used tariffs, right? And they tariffed the heck out of them. So what did those manufacturers do? Where did they move their production? They moved it to the States. Mm-hmm. So I see Parrot did the same thing. Parrot USA now is doing the same thing. So I think that's how this evolves. But I think competition in general is a good thing, and I'm really excited with Skydio, what they're doing, what Parrot's doing, Autel, what they're doing and how they're developing, and pushing DJI and keeping prices down and pushing DJI as well. So At least on
Yeah,
our side.
definitely. I think we're seeing some really exciting innovations come out in the space. So it'll be great to see what happens over the next couple of years.
To me, it's the software. I just don't. That's my only concern for this is, and I know it'll sort itself out. But if you get too much dilution, if I'm a software developer and I've developed a mapping platform that works real well, say with DJI, now I have to turn around. I have to support. How many different things do I have to support? Right? I can't write. How many SDKs do I have to write to turn around or comply with to be able to have my software serve all the platforms? I'm always going to go, to Android and iOS. That's what it really boils down to. So, it'll be interesting. On my side of it, I just like getting better equipment that's more capable and at a cost that allows public safety agencies to adopt them. That's really what it comes down to. There's a barrier to entry to market for cost. You're talking about saving lives. You're talking about the difference between seeing something and not seeing something. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and that might actually segue well into our next question, which is, what excites you most about this technology? And is there anything in particular, or maybe a couple things that you see that are potentially holding the drone industry back?
Honestly, what excites me the most about it is there's very few times in your life or career that you'll have those pivotal moments where you can kind of see how, in my case, in emergency services, how we do business, where there's a quantum shift, where something can change the way that we operate. And that's what I see with this type of technology, and it comes down to that situational awareness, and it continues to grow in the use of those sensors to be able to manage an emergency. I stood on more than my share of emergency scenes, standing out front or in my vehicle on a radio, and my crews would go inside or they'd be out, spread out. And I can tell you, when you're as an incident commander managing emergency, that is the loneliest feeling in the world, because you're scared to death for your people, where they're at. Is everything going okay? Because you don't have a picture. Now I have a picture. I can see how to manage that. So I'm extremely excited to see where this goes and how we can continue to develop it for public safety, to help protect not only the responders' lives, but the citizens that we serve. What was the second part of your question, Leslie?
The second part was, is there anything that you're seeing kind of holding the industry back?
As far as holding the industry back, obviously one of them we talked about is this unsettledness of funds for us in the public sector are huge, and grant funds are a big part of that. So having people be unsettled about, well, geez, if I buy this, am I going to be able to continue to use it? Like there were a lot, as you guys know, there were a lot of DJI drones already in play for federal use that all got grounded. Now the public servant side of me says, okay, well, those being governed surplus, because I'll be more than happy to pick those up at a discount for my team because I can still use them. But realistically, until this kind of settles itself out, I see that being not a barrier to entry, but certainly a concern about when I'm deciding what I want to buy or what platform I'm going to build out, what I'm going to do. Going forward, most of the things that I see are things that we talked about: establishing standards for training, establishing manufacturers and maintenance standards. To me, are a huge thing, because we are relying more upon these aircraft, and we do want to fly over people, and we do want to fly beyond visual line of sight. And so all of this stuff, airspace traffic management, being able to fly a lot of drones flying around and not run into each other, visual line of sight, these are all barriers that they're working on, because let's face it, technology moves much faster than the regulatory side does. But honestly, the FAA, in my humble opinion, has done a good job, but as fast as things is moving, of at least trying to get there, especially in a political environment that we're in currently. But those are the biggest barriers we have right now, is not creativity, is not the creativity and the innovation, because boy, you put these in the hands of people, and you go on any of the blogs and Facebook pages, and there's always somebody out there that's like, I tried this, and it's like, that's genius, but is the regulatory hurdles getting past those things to allow us to go out, and maintenance programs are a big part of that, so that we are confident in the airframes that we're flying, and that they're going to be able to be used safely, and that we can get the approvals we need to fly it the way that we want to.
Excellent. Well, Scott, I know we're coming up on a little over an hour here. Any final thoughts or words of encouragement for the drone industry? I think it's been a really insightful conversation. It's great to hear from somebody that's you've been in the field, you are a pilot, you've grown a drone program. I think this has been a great segment. But any final words? And if people want to get in touch, ask any questions, maybe get a little sneak peek at that first chapter in the growing a UAS program, public safety program for dummies.
Here's my final thoughts, and this is obviously geared more towards public safety, but this would apply to anybody, but certainly public safety. Mm-hmm. If you're starting a program out, use the tools that you have at hand. So since the book isn't written yet, go to where all the chapters are being written. And so what I would offer up is podcasts like the one that you guys are doing through InterDrone. Webcasts. There's a lot more, clearly with COVID going on, there's a lot more of that going on. We can't travel. If you're fortunate to get to travel when we get to travel again, go to conferences and network with other teams. And I can't stress the importance enough of using social media. If you hate Facebook, I get it. I just had this conversation the other day with a battalion chief. And he's like, well, I don't have a Facebook account. I hate Facebook. And I go, okay, well, that's fine. But make up a stupid dummy account, turn on all the privacy things. And then go to these Facebook groups. The power of those groups and I'm not a big Instagram person, but I know Facebook and Instagram going. But there's a lot of very, very good groups and web pages that will help teach you and keep you up to date going forward and get you information. You go on any of these pages. We run one of them called Public Safety UAS. There's fire drones. There's off the top of my head, I don't recall, but you can do a search for them. That is an excellent place as you're starting out to get the answers that you need so that you can identify what equipment and what you need to do. Or when you run into a problem and you don't know how to fix it, there's somebody that you could post something on one of those groups and those pages and you'll find what you want. Or a Google search, you talk about starting in a UAS program and you're going to hit probably this podcast. So you have a lot of the power that you have in the palm of your hand with your smartphone or your tablet or laptop. Use that. That'll help you navigate starting a program, getting it started right, and as you go forward, continuing to build it out and share what you learn and what everybody else learns. And organizations like drone responders being the one I mentioned before on the law enforcement side. Lizzie, I don't know if drone responders covers really everybody, and that's not pitching or pushing them, but you get.
No, we've worked with Charles in the past. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, but that's the one that comes to the front of my mind as far as helping us get the information we need to get programs in place and do this thing right and write the chapters right, so that 10 years from now, when you sit down, the manuals there, it all comes from everything that we've talked about today.
Well, great. Again, really appreciate you taking the time, joining us, Scott, sharing some of that insight. We look forward to seeing you again at InterDrone Online, December 15th through 17th. We'll see you again in a virtual format, just like this.
On my list of things to do. I think I got an hour there or something, so I should be good.
Yeah. We'll get it sorted out. So, just thanks again for everybody for tuning in. This podcast will be on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Music. It'll be on the InterDrone website, wherever pods are casted. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.